Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Thanks for joining us here today. And we have a wonderful guest who's going to be talking about culture impact. So Tiersa Hall Smith, thank you so much for joining us. I said that backwards, Smith Hall, sorry. Thank you for joining us, I think from sunny Florida. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely from sunny Florida.
Yeah, very hot.
Very
Well, hopefully you've got the air conditioning on and it'll be a little bit cool while we have this hot conversation that we're going to have today. And, I want to take a second here and thank our audience for joining us. We know you have a choice as to what podcast you listen to, and we're grateful that you often choose Women in Leadership Talk as we bring you really special guests that, give you items that can help you or conversations that can help you have an impact, whether you're a small business, mid-sized business, a large business, individual. Our intention is to give you valuable insight. So everyone, welcome and thanks for joining us. So Tiersa, let's give a little background on you so our audience knows who you are. So Tiersa Smith Hall, she is a world-class speaker. She's a master trainer, an HR and cultural consultant, and leadership and engagement coach. She helps professionals and organizations bridge that gap between where they are and where they want to be. And she does that by helping maximize leadership, increasing engagement, and fostering happy and healthy work cultures. She also happens to be the author of Culture Impact, which just launched in June, and she's already been listed as #1 bestseller on Amazon. So congratulations, Tiersa, that's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, we're thrilled for you. And, her book is really about a playbook for small and mid-sized companies. And we're going to dig into that a little bit today to give you some insight on culture and why culture is so important. But before we move to that, I also want to mention that Tiersa is also part of Forbes HR Council. And so she gets exposed to a lot of things and also is a consistent speaker and I would assume writer as well for Forbes Council. Yeah, which is great. So let's jump in. Let's talk culture. So before we go there, what led you to where you are today? How did you get here?
That's a beautiful question. Obviously, I have a background in HR. That's where I started my career. And I was always that girl that was mediating between two people, trying to get that common ground happening. But I found that I thought it was because I wanted to be a lawyer, but I found out later on that it was actually HR that I was destined to do from doing an organizational behavior course. But what's gotten me to this point, really, it's two-part. One, I have my beautiful twin girls, Brooklyn and Lyric, to thank for shifting me into consulting roles because they were diagnosed with autism, which required me to make an adjustment and move. And so that allowed me to have that courage to take that jump to do what I've always been doing my entire life, which is really just thriving in HR and building a legacy and helping other HR professionals grow. And so what's led me to culture is really kind of twofold, because culture is really something that's obviously the key buzzword of today, but it's also a connector for HR, because when we talk about culture and the changes that are happening, who are they asking to fix it and to resolve it and to make it happen? HR, right? So quite naturally, those two things come together. And it's always been a passion of mine. Before I knew what the terminologies were, before I became certified as a behavioral consultant, it was always a passion for me to meet people where they were. Right. So having people be comfortable where they are, know who they are, understand how the way I operate affects them. And so that's always been a passion of mine. And so getting into this field of doing HR consulting, I also connected and partnered with a company called Culture to Fit. And we do culture transformations across organizations, helping have a clear, vivid idea of your vision, your mission, what you stand for. But let's face it, most of organizations have missions and vision statements that have been created, umpteen years ago. And so the new people, do they really understand what the vision is? Are they connecting? Do they see themselves in that? Most people don't do that. And so in this current time, post-pandemic, when we all had that opportunity to really just see life a little bit differently and pause, that has sparked my passion for connecting those two worlds, helping organizations build themselves from an HR side, constructing, proper policies and structure, but also helping them to be more personable employers, because the tides have shifted, and what I call the pendulum of advantage has shifted from business to the people. And so now there's a requirement that is better understanding and harmony.
Yeah. Wow. You said many things there that I want to talk about. So first of all, definitely there's a new era. And we were talking about that just before we came on the show. I think that's such an important aspect for people to grasp, that things have changed. And if you're doing business the way you've always done business, you're going to struggle. So today's a great conversation to talk about how do you start to shift some of that. I think the other piece that you talked about there is, really human resources has a big job in every organization because you're front and center to people, and people is what makes our companies run, right? And so you really got to be able to tap into that, but then also look at what's the strategy and the big picture. And something you said really resonated when you said people have mission and vision statements they've had forever, but they maybe aren't alive still. And so it becomes words on a piece of paper or on a poster or whatever. And those new people that come in, even people who've been around for a long time, they might not be embracing or even understanding why that is the vision or the mission. So let's talk about that a little bit. And because culture is such a hot topic right now, and it's not easy, because it's not just HR that does it. How do organizations go about creating and defining that culture that they really want to have?
Yes. And so I think a good place to start is going back to the mission and vision statement, right? Because you have the official mission, vision, what you feel your company is, what you stand for, and also your core values, what you value. Those are what are written. And so in organizations, you find that there's the written culture of what you would like it to look like. And then there's the unofficial culture, which is exactly what it is. Meaning if you were to do a general survey, and it's something I challenge managers all the time to do when they're working on leadership and how to drive culture, is ask all employees that you run into randomly, what do they think is the general consensus of the value of the organization? You'll hear it. There's lots of gossiping. That's a part of culture now. That's your culture. Or red tape, meaning there's things you want to achieve, but there's so many different channels you have to go through. By the time it gets to the end, you've lost all your motivation and passion to be able to make changes in the organization. That could be the culture. The culture could be if you stand up against something, then you are exercised or you are isolated from the group. And so the culture is if you see something going wrong, don't say anything about it. So it's important for organizations to tap into what exactly is the culture in our organization. What do we have written? What would we like to see achieved? And what is the unofficial, perspective? And most of the times we get that through assessment, right? We do an assessment of different persons within the organization, and we use multiple forms of assessments to get some insight. And then we build that work through helping them to develop the culture. And it's so important that you have the big word buy-in. You need to have all people that are going to be critical to driving the culture, but also the executives who have the vision and the CEO who has the vision for what the company culture will look like. You have to have a process where that happens organically within the group. And so that needs to be facilitated. Usually I recommend that you have someone outside facilitate that kind of change, because there's passion. There's persons who are saying, this is the way it's been for the last 10, 15 years. And then there's people who are saying, this is new times, we need to innovate. And so having someone that has that expert insight and ability to facilitate those ideas, what we find is when that happens, everyone is so excited about the end product. Because they are now able to see how all of their ideas, all important from different perspectives, have now created something that they're proud of. And when you're proud of something, what do? We tell everybody about it.
Exactly.
And we protect it. And we ensure that if there's new people that come within the organization, they know what it is and they will know what it's supposed to look like. And so your culture identity is so critical to the success of your organization. And I think it's important. This is a good time to put in the statistic. There's a report that Gallup just released. It's the 2023 Future of Work report. And it breaks down like the statistics of employees and their value for culture. And 59% of employees currently now in the world are not engaged.
Yeah.
59%. 51% of them are looking for a job. They're actively looking for opportunities. And so what that tells us is people are looking around because they're not comfortable with where they are, because they're not engaged. And so if you want engagement to happen and you want retention to happen, all of this is tied into the culture. And so the reason behind why they're actively looking, statistics again show 41% say culture is the reason.
Yeah.
So that speaks directly, you can't deny the data, right? Because culture is a fluffy word, but when you break down the data and retention and the fact that competitors are already using culture to their advantage, this is why businesses now, the demand is that we focus on the culture.
Yeah. And so many things there again that you said, like, because you think about the Great Resignation or the Great Reorganization, however you want to look at it, when people aren't happy, they will make a change. And we've seen a lot of that. And culture is not easy. It's not easy for sure. And I mean, you're going to talk about that, but it's so important to really bring people together for that common cause or that, that belief in a mission, whatever that is, right? Like we all want to believe in something and that we're contributing to that cause or that mission or vision. And so it is so important that there's constant communication around that. So what have you seen? Like you're working with mid-size, small, large, like different size organizations on culture. And what are you seeing as some of the most common mistakes or mishaps that companies run into when they're trying to drive culture change or culture shifts?
I think the biggest hampering or the biggest thing that's preventing culture from improving within organizations is the focus on leadership, because the leadership training hasn't been on a high in the past, but also the type of leader that is selected for an organization in this current time needs to change. Why? Because I've seen in many of situations in coaching, you have managers who have been successful in executing the requirements for a role, right? Meeting the budget, the timeline, exceeding budget, bringing in massive amounts of money, never having an issue with meeting budget requirements. But now in current time, they're not able to meet those budgets. They're struggling, they're losing employees, and they're like, but this is the same methodology I've been using. What's different? And what is different is that particular manager would achieve results, but not using leadership influential skills. They would use force, they would use consequence, they would use the individual's fear of job security, right? Fear of losing
intimidation.
Right. But because we're in a current time now where people aren't afraid to lose their job because they just lost their jobs and they just had to spend all this time in the house with people who they've been neglecting to work, that they now have an advantage. And so the way that you get the results, if you didn't have leadership skills before, you now have to acquire these skills. If you ran it by results and by statistics, by micromanaging and pressure, you now have to learn the other tools that people use, right? Management, coercion, and force, I always say, goes from 9 to 5. It stops at 5 o'clock. But if you want to influence someone beyond the 5, meaning if there's some stuff we need to do, more work outside of the working schedule and timeline, it's influence that makes that. It's the quality of relationship that really gets those types of results. And so companies have to now put an investment into selection of leadership, meaning selecting people that have those leadership qualities and providing a lot more training for those who don't. And that means soft skills. The demand for soft skills has increased significantly because now people are saying, okay, I have to understand my employee. If I don't, employees are going to leave and go where they're understood, go where they're valued, go where they feel worthy. And so that is a huge element that I've seen. It's a shortcoming, right? It's an area where they haven't thought about that process. the results were coming in. So again, it's business. We're looking at the bottom line. The bottom line is I'm getting the results in this department. I'm getting what I need. So I don't necessarily see that there was a huge issue. But now when you see high performers start to leave those groups and the productivity starts to become impacted, then we see the need for the changes in that arena.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. I mean, the soft skills, those are not things that we're taught, right? And I even think back, to my own time when, I was running different corporations. A lot of times you would select leaders based on their solo contributions, not their actual leadership abilities. And as executives and leaders of organizations, we owe it to our people to really ensure that we've got leaders that have strong soft skills. They have that empathy. They have the emotional intelligence to be able to, cultivate that strong culture that you're talking about. And culture, when you have it, you have people who are loyal, people who are, really committed to the mission, the vision of what you were just describing earlier. So maybe you share some examples of who you see doing it really well. And I mean, you don't have to name specific companies, of course, but what are the attributes? What are those characteristics you're seeing when they're doing it really well? And what is standing them apart from the ones who are crumbling from a culture perspective?
Sure. My favorite example of good company culture, and it's not really one that's listed often, is Chick-fil-A, believe it or not.
Oh, yes.
Everyone loves Chick-fil-A for the customer service, right? It's like great service,
great culture,
always nice. But why are the people always nice? It goes back to the heart of the culture of the organization and what they value, right? And they value that they need to invest in their people. So you see a lot of the Chick-fil-A students out there, they get scholarships, they have assistance with universities. You have Chick-fil-A employees that grew within the ranks, went through management programs, and then own franchises. And so you can see that the investment is clear. They have core values that they insert into everyday language. And I think that's what is key. Getting culture to stick requires that whatever your values are, they are showing up everywhere. So if the value is truth and it's lemonade in a cup, do you have the truthful measurement here for the lemonade? Is it truthfully cold? Are you standing towards the value of it? If it isn't, then yes, it might be a wastage, but we're sticking to what the standard is. And so that uniformity of values and that consistency and that decision to not waver from that is what creates that value and that culture in Chick-fil-A. So Chick-fil-A's written culture and their unofficial culture are one and the same. And so that's why you see that uniformity. My son loves Chick-fil-A, and we're driving through the drive-through and we're waiting and we're like, 1, 2, 3, thank you, my pleasure. We hear the my pleasure. And then when they swipe the card, they're saying, you're all set. We know exactly what they're going to say because that culture is uniform. It is always pleasant. I've never seen a grumpy Chick-fil-A person in the drive-through. And so those people come to work every day excited about what they do because that's the culture there. They feel valued. They see themselves within that organization. The leaders, particularly when you see them train the employees, they exercise care, encouragement. They stand just enough feet away to allow for authority and that individual to feel empowered. All of those elements are what sets the tone for culture to stick and for culture to be exemplary. And I think Chick-fil-A does that extremely well based on their values. Maybe not as popular because still somewhat religiously tied, but phenomenal when it comes to the culture. And they also involve their customers in the culture. So now the customers are like, wait, this is the standard. And they are even just maintaining the standard and celebrating the standard that is them. So I love them as an example. Another good example would be like Microsoft, Google. Because again, sense of belonging is high on the list in terms of culture, in terms of getting people to stay within an organization. And they do that very well because those individuals get to be as creative as they would like to be. They set the tone. The working environment is relaxed. It's comfortable. It has, you're not conformed to sit at a desk. You can sit on a spinning wheel. It doesn't matter. Whatever. Exactly. Whatever it requires to get your creativity flowing in the way that it's going to benefit us as an organization, we're committed to that. And so that sense of comfort and free flow, that really is very unique about the culture, and everyone who is a part of that, you see those same similar qualities amongst them. And I think a good final example would be Twitter pre-Elon Musk. Because if you look at Twitter pre-Elon Musk, you look at the high level of retention, you look at the creativity, the caliber of individuals there, and what that work environment and culture was prior to that, you see that the culture was clearly identified with this great sense of belonging and that type of connection. And you see what happens when the culture isn't that. You see what happens where the exit happens, because those individuals no longer felt at one with a sense of belonging in that environment anymore, because the values and the standards that they came to know were no longer the case.
Fine, though, Tiersa, that happens often when there is a leadership change, no matter what the company is, right? Like I as you were just saying that, I was thinking back to different examples in my own career where, you know, a new leader, a new CEO would come on board and they're hesitant, right? Because first thing they do is, oh, that person's going to bring in their own team. I just had this conversation with a client earlier today that, oh, we have a new CEO. Yep, I'm sure they're going to bring in their own team. And so that creates some of that uncertainty that, you know, am I valued? Those questions come up. So does that mean long-term culture is negatively impacted, or is that maybe a short-term kind of wait and see? I'm using Elon Musk one as your example there. Is that a short-term shift in culture, and will it go back? Will it be better, or will it like right now it's kind of doing the
But that's a good question, and it really depends. It depends on what the organization does with respect to that. Because anytime you have significant change, if you have significant change in leadership, you should be revamping your culture. You should be restating and redefining your culture every time you have a change out of especially if you have a massive change out in the number of leaders, because leadership is critical to driving the culture. People don't leave organizations, they leave the manager. They leave the person that's responsible for them. And so those individuals are critical to the organization. And if they're heavily aligned with the culture and they leave, you have to have the person who's coming in be heavily aligned. And that buy-in and that level of passion only comes through going through a process where I'm familiarized with the culture. I see myself in this culture that you're asking me to drive. And so now I can sit behind the wheel. I'm in it because I'm invested in it. And so that means stopping and not just saying, are you the individual for the job operational wise? Are you the individual for the job culture wise? What do you stand for? What are your values? And do these values match our organization, which makes for easy execution? If there's not synergy with the individual, he might be phenomenal, she might be brilliant, but if she doesn't match well value wise with the culture, she's not going to drive it. She's not going to drive the culture. What's going to happen? You're going to have more inconsistency in your culture.
That's such an important aspect of, even in just to go back to the HR piece, the human resource piece, like really, it's not just about looking at the person's resume and do their skills match what we need. It is looking at it holistically. So I love that you brought that up. And that's a good challenge for leaders of organizations when they're hiring, right? Like, how does that person fit with the culture and the initiatives we have moving forward? I want to go back for just a moment to Chick-fil-A, because I agree with you. I think they have a phenomenal culture. They have probably one of the best training programs of any restaurant, hospitality, retail organization. Lots of people could learn many lessons from them. And if you're not studying them, I highly recommend you do, no matter what kind of industry you have, because they do things phenomenally well. But one of the things you pointed out there that I think is so important is the investment, not just from a training perspective, but it's that investment it's the long game. It's not, oh, let's teach you how to be a cashier and put chicken sandwiches, which are the best in the world, into a bag. But it really is about what are the opportunities. It's that nurturing, that engagement, that, creating that family atmosphere of, we're here to help you be successful, not here to find your failures or your wrongdoing. But when you talked about, you could even buy a franchise down the road, that really does model long-term investment. And it works for their culture. It amazes me because, in Canada, we've just gotten Chick-fil-A just recently, but I'm from America. So every time we go to the States, let's find Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
Love it. But, you have to, as a business person, study that culture, really look at what they do right. And to your point about having someone who's objective, somebody who can help you connect those dots is so important, because we only see what we can see, right? And you need that other person to be able to help you identify, well, this is what you see, but this is what I hear.
Right.
And so maybe talk a little bit about that, because there is sometimes that gap that happens. So can you share maybe some examples, that you've seen of what the impact is of that gap?
Well, you definitely have to bridge whatever gaps are within any organization. And I think it's a timely point to mention the 5 generations that are working in the workplace and the Gen Z generation, which demands, and they're pretty much the ones leading the change in the world because of how they work and what they require in order to remain there. And so a key element for them is vision. A key element for them is, I don't want to know what I'm doing today, and I don't want to hear that eventually someday I will be a manager. What is the track and the process for that? First you do this, then it's this is followed by this. They need to see the full vision. They need to see the execution of where they're going and where you're trying to take them. And they need to be reminded of that throughout the process. And so knowing how the construct of your organization is, who is the future of your organization, it's so important to bridge the gap between the generations that work there, and showing that those young people who are vivacious and excited and really on a fast track for learning also have that balance of people who know that certain things take time and that there's processes to each layer of what's happening. And I think Chick-fil-A has that example where they have those leaders within that organization who take the time to really lay out the vision for the organization, and also allow things like a growth plan that lets the individual see, this is the stuff that I need to accomplish. And that leads to longevity, that leads to retention, because if I know that these are the tracks I'm working on, I'm constantly busy and focused on what's the next step within my journey, versus waiting for eventually, right? John Maxwell always says, if you set up someday can be any day, right? You could just, every day you'll be working towards someday, or you won't be working towards it because there's no sense of measurement to really help encourage you to close those gaps. And so being aware of where the gaps are and having a plan and a culture that's embedded in closing those gaps is what helps that process continue to move forward.
Beautiful, beautiful. Awesome. So I'm just going to shift a little bit because I want to go to your book.
Sure.
maybe, talk a little bit about small steps, right? Like, what's 1 or 2 things that, people who are listening today, what can you do to start to test your culture? What might be some examples of those small steps to have impact on culture?
Well, I like to say that culture starts with you. So the first thing is, if you're someone that's in a leadership role or trying to drive what's happening within your department, or leading the people unofficially, because there's leaders at every level, of course. But if you're trying to make changes in the culture, you can't do that until you take a look at who you are. So in my book, one of the things we point out, we break down the word impactful. And impactful leadership is the concept of how you drive culture. So the first thing is, I am. Who are you? Do you know who you are? Right? If I ask you if you're a good leader, most people will say, yeah, because otherwise, why would you be in a management role if you didn't feel that you had some capabilities to do that? But do you know who you are? Do you know what your style is? Most people know who they are in the sense of your general makeup, your general personality. But what we find statistically, Tasha Urich, she with Harvard Review did a study on internal and external awareness. And in internal awareness, most leaders or managers know that. They have a good sense of who they are as leaders. But when you reach to external awareness, they're not quite clear at all how what they do and how they lead affects others. And so that big missing gap, when you look at the statistics of how many people possess, in her survey, both internal and external, only 10 to 15% of people did. So
Wow.
that's a huge one. And so I ask people, do you know your leadership style? Do you know who you are? And then I turn around and ask, have you done a leadership assessment? Most people haven't. How do you know who you are if you haven't done an assessment of what your natural capabilities are? And so that's one part of it. Knowing who you are, knowing how who you are affects the people in your organization is one part of your process. And then knowing who you are as a leader, how does that connect to the organization that you're a part of? Because what you value and what that organization values has to be at one. If you have huge discrepancies between that, then that's not a culture fit. That's something you have to revisit, because in order for you to drive that, you will literally have to be intentful every day to drive something that you don't really feel invested in, right? And so if you have some of those common grounds already, then you can move forward now because you have a good sense of who you are and how that affects others, which means you'll be able to make the adjustments necessary. But then you reach the point where you need to make a pact. A pact is a commitment to the people on your team to be able to open up culture. One of the biggest, easiest ways to start culture formulation is conversations. I'm actually doing a series coming up soon on culture conversations, just where to begin. What kind of questions can you simply say and speak to the individuals? And I tie this back into women, because women in leadership, some of us are private owners, and also we're pushing ourselves within the workspace to be able to have that presence and command that same level of respect, and having a keen sense of understanding of who you are and the people around you and how they work and how to influence them becomes strategically important to how you execute the role. And so now it's about making the commitment, because guess what? Statistics say 42% we are more likely to execute something that we write down, that we put into
for
commitment.
sure.
So making the commitment to the changes in your culture by voicing them, sharing them, it puts you in a place where you're accountable to the people within the team. You're selling something that you now have to make good on. And so that helps you work with the people that are within the group, start the conversations about, what do you think this organization represents? What do you like most about where you are? How do you feel about this particular topic? Even general conversations like, what did we accomplish today? What do we still have yet to accomplish? How do we feel about what we did today? Simple questions like that, simple engagement questions like, what is your personal goals? Because your personal goals are important to the organization, because we know that you require a higher level of sense of belonging. So if you want to feel you want to belong there, you want to share who you are. Gen Z is definitely a requirement, not even an option, because most Gen Z people have this entrepreneurial spirit. So they want to do endeavors, and they have dreams and goals, and they want to know that this organization can be the platform for me to do that, or will eventually be some sort of process where I get to do a little bit of both. Because if I'm not fulfilled, then I can't stay within the organization. So that leads to the last part of impactful, which is fulfillment, which is that sense of belonging. Because when you know who you are as a leader, you know how that affects the people in your group, and you've made the commitment to make the changes, then everyone is executing at their highest level of productivity because they feel a part of the organization. They're bought in. And so the statistics show how that all comes together. And so if you really want to make changes within an organization, I think the work starts with you. If you're not a manager, it still starts with you. How do you feel within that organization? And that might cancel you out of the organization. You may feel that it's not a fit, but that you may find that there's some things that I value that the organization also values. How do we maximize that and make that into something great? And I think that's where it begins, just having the conversation. If I'm Jamaican and you're from Canada, there's certain things that you can pick up on to know that, oh, she's from Canada. I don't have to ask that. I can maybe hear it when we say A. I'm from Turks and Caicos. We stole that from Canada, so we say A a lot. We're like, you going to the store, A? So people say, are you Canadian? I'm like, no, we just stole that from Canada.
Turks and Caicos is way nicer than Canada.
But it's same, right? So your culture is not something you force. It's something it's in your everyday conversation, your everyday language. What do we stand for, and how is that our actions reflected in that?
Wow, really great feedback. And so people can find that in your book, Culture Impact. I see it behind you there. So, our audience who's paying attention here, you can get that on Amazon. Tiersa, where else would they be able to find your book?
Sure. You can find it on my website, www.tiersahall.com. You can order from there as well. And it's on Kindle as well as on Amazon, hard print copies. So yeah, you can find it anywhere you like. It's usually those are the key areas that we sell it from. But
Awesome. I love that. Well, and it's, it's timing wise, it's a great time to be thinking about culture. Because, I know a lot of organizations are struggling with how do we retain our people? How do we not just retain them, but how do we attract them? How do we get them to come to work for us? So your culture does make a huge difference. And as Tiersa just described, it starts with you as an individual and how aware you are of what's happening with your culture. So Tiersa, I'm cognizant of our time. We've covered a lot really fast, which is amazing. And I just want to shout out again to our audience. Like if you have questions about culture, how to get started, reach out to Tiersa. She's on LinkedIn, she's on Instagram, or you can send it to me. I'll send it to her. But, don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. Or if you're in a situation where maybe your culture is not what you want, how can you navigate that? How can you personally start to impact that and have some shifts? So, it's reliant on all of us to be aware of that and to make those necessary changes. So Tiersa, anything that I didn't ask that you want to make sure our audience knows today that they can walk away with?
Well, not really. I think we covered pretty much.
We covered a lot.
We want to discuss, but I just want you to say, to be aware, like this is a new time, and new times aren't always challenges or something to see as work to do, but it's a great opportunity for you to unify the productivity that you typically achieve from business to human self-fulfillment, which means that's an overall win for everyone involved. If we can do this the right way, where people feel that sense of belonging, come invested and give you their all at work, and you're achieving, higher numbers than you ever had. So embrace the change, do the changes while you can, because competition and everything else is driving it. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and being prepared is where it starts. Do the work and it will long-term prove to your benefit.
Yeah. Well said. And not easy, but it is simple. To your point earlier.
Start small.
Start small, take those baby steps, and it'll get you there. So Tiersa, thank you. Thanks so much for joining us today. This has been a great conversation. I think some beautiful nuggets that were shared that, can give people a starting place. And just really even doing that assessment. I think that's such an important aspect. And you could reach out to either one of us to talk about assessments, because I think we both do leadership, different leadership assessments that we can help you with on that. And I also want to thank our audience. I know, you have a choice as to who you listen to, and hopefully you'll walk away from today and go, yeah, how is my culture and how do I impact that? So thank you for that. And thanks for joining us. And if you're curious about your leadership, you can always go on the WIL Empowered website and take our free leadership quiz. It'll give you some insight as to, how you're showing up as a leader. And that's free. There's, no charge for that, but it does give you insight. And I'd love to hear from you and love to hear what you've learned about yourself. So everyone, thank you so much. Tiersa, thank you again. I'm grateful to you for being here. Congratulations on your book and the success you're already having. And, I'm sure we'll see you again, part of the WIL Empowered community. And so just thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you on the next WIL Talk podcast. Take care and have a great day.
Bye-bye.